In late 2014, a 29-year-old British national called Rurik Jutting appeared to be living a life most of us could only dream about. He was Cambridge educated, living in a luxury apartment block in the Wan Chai area of Hong Kong, and receiving a salary of at least £250,000 a year from his job in banking. However, in October 2014, Jutting appeared to throw it all away, resigning from his position and posting a cryptic message which said, quote, "I'm out of the office indefinitely. For urgent inquiries, or indeed any inquiries, please contact someone who is not an insane psychopath." This statement gave an insight into who Jutting was beneath his mask: a sexual sadist, a man who for years had fantasies about torturing and mutilating women. And when he posted this message, he was sitting in an apartment where he'd partially decapitated a woman who he'd tortured for 3 days, whose body was hidden in a suitcase on his balcony, and he was far from done. Before he was finally arrested, he would claim another victim, one that he described simply as prey. Welcome to Evil Among Us. Rurik George Caton Jutting was born in London in March 1985, the first child of Graham and Helen Jutting, and he was undeniably raised in a world of privilege. He grew up in a Grade 2 listed building called Foxbourne Cottage in the village of Cobham in Surrey. This building was apparently the inspiration for illustrations of Toad Hall in the book The Wind in the Willows. Jutting began his education at Wallop School in Weybridge in Surrey. People who remember him at this age noted that Jutting kept to himself and had few friends. He was clearly intelligent, and he knew it, and even at a young age came across as arrogant, that he was better than everyone else. This was likely fueled by his mother Helen, who later stated told him, from as early as he could remember, that he was special. In fact, even his name seemed to set him apart from others, with the name Rurik meaning roughly famous ruler or renowned king, and being associated with the founder of a dynasty who ruled parts of Eastern Europe for centuries. After finishing primary school, Jutting was admitted to the prestigious Winchester College in the city of Winchester in Hampshire, where fees are around £34,000 a year. Despite being admitted to such a prestigious school, Jutting displayed feelings of superiority and entitlement. He later reported feeling aggrieved that he'd come 6th in the scholarship selection process rather than first, despite the fact that the outcome was the same. He and the first place boy both got scholarships, and when his mother congratulated him on achieving this, he said that he felt, quote, almost insulted because it implied that she had any doubt in her mind that he would get in, which to him was a foregone conclusion. Whilst at the school, one word was used by people who knew Jutting to describe him: arrogant. And as the years went on, his air of superiority became more apparent. He had few friends and was a loner during his school years, but he excelled academically. It's during this time that Rurik Jutting would later claim that he was sexually assaulted by a fellow pupil. I approach claims like this with skepticism. Sex offenders are often extremely manipulative people and will claim to have been victims themselves at some point in their lives in order to try and diminish the seriousness of their actions. This may or may not have happened, but even if it did, this is no excuse for what came next. Being a victim yourself as a child does not give you the right to traumatise others. Whilst outwardly, the place and area that Jutting was raised appeared idyllic, behind the scenes there were fractures in the family. It's reported that his father Graham had significant mental health issues and attempted to remove himself from the land of the living when his son was 16 years old. In addition, there were significant marital problems between his parents, and it's reported that his mother had chronic health issues, but what these were is not recorded anywhere. Likely, as a way to cope with his issues, Jutting turned to pornography, and by the age of around 17 years old was heavily addicted, watching it as much as he could whilst at school. He quickly focused on violent porn, revolving around rape and torture. This carried on when Jutting attended Peterhouse College at the University of Cambridge, where he studied law and history. Someone who knew Rurik Jutting during this time stated, quote, "If they had been looking for a reference, I'd have said, I wouldn't want to spend more than an hour in a room with him, but he was incredibly bright. He seemed quite detached. I'd never have described him as affable." Jutting would spend much of his free time glued to his computer screen, obsessively looking at violent pornography. He graduated with a 2-1 and was apoplectic. He made a massive fuss, claiming that he'd been deprived of a first-class degree, which he was clearly entitled to, and he accused the examiners of being incompetent. This is who Jutting was, a man-baby, someone who couldn't accept criticism, who wanted what he wanted, when he wanted it. He was the one in control. After graduating, Jutting began a high-flying career in banking, working first for Barclays Bank, and this gave him the funds to begin to live out his sick fantasies. He said that he used his first bonus in 2009 to hire prostitutes and attend orgies, and these types of sexual encounters would dominate his life until his arrest 5 years later. Rurik Jutting later told a psychiatrist that he found controlled and submissive sex more and more arousing and would push the limits with prostitutes. But what did he mean by this? Given what he went on to do, I think that Jutting was likely a serial rapist. His pushing boundaries translates to doing what he wanted, whether they consented or not, and given that he was later diagnosed as being a sexual sadist, I'm confident that these women were subjected to abuse, even torture. Not to the horrific extent that we'll get to later, but it's clear that by the time that Rurik Jutting was thrust into the public eye in 2014, he was an expert in inflicting the maximum amount of pain on his victims. This had to start somewhere. This was the culmination of years of practice. One thing he did admit to doing with these sex workers in these early years was removing condoms during intercourse without their consent, which in itself is an act of rape. The character that springs to mind when I think about Jutting is Patrick Bateman from the film American Psycho, and the scenes where he hires prostitutes, essentially to torture and eventually kill them. If you've seen this film, you'll know what I mean. I imagine that Jutting's actions were not dissimilar to this fictional madman. Both clearly saw women not as human beings in their own right. They were simply sacks of meat. Giving credibility to my assessment that Rurik Jutting was likely, on top of everything else, a serial sex offender, was the fact that he would actually admit to raping 2 sex workers in Hong Kong before the murders, but I have no doubt this is just the tip of the iceberg. However, Jutting chose a demographic who would be unlikely to report him to the police. Who would they believe? A sex worker or a high-flying banker who was soon earning over £250,000 a year? It was during this same time that Jutting was becoming addicted to cocaine, and as we'll get to, he would spend almost unbelievable amounts on this drug and prostitutes as the years went on. Jutting left Barclays to join Merrill Lynch in 2010, initially working in their London office, and he was quickly promoted. But behind the scenes, he was engaging in days-long drug binges and spending his time sleeping with prostitutes, and his behaviour and demeanour became more unpredictable and more erratic. He was moved to another part of the bank, and then in July 2013, directed to go and work in Hong Kong. Rurik Jutting was a loose cannon, but he made the bank money, so he was kept on. Jutting rented apartment 3109 in the J Residence apartment building in the Wan Chai area of Hong Kong, and this seems to have been entirely by design. This property was right in the heart of the red light district, an area where sex workers from Thailand, Indonesia and the Philippines, often trying to raise money to support their families living in extreme poverty back home, would offer their services to rich Western bankers. These were perfect targets, vulnerable women who he could dominate utterly, use and abuse at his whim, likely with no repercussions. In the space of 15 months, Rurik Jutting would descend into a world of utter depravity, engaging in a campaign of drug and alcohol abuse, rape, and eventually the torture and murder of 2 innocent women. Whilst in Hong Kong, Rurik Jutting was totally disinhibited. He was, by the time of his move, in July 2013, aged 28, either a millionaire or close to it, and he was being paid ridiculous amounts of money in his position at Merrill Lynch. His salary was, according to most reports, around £370,000 a year, so just over $500,000 in today's money, and this doesn't include bonuses he would likely have been paid. It's clear that Jutting had money to burn, and he quickly got to work. It's reported that in the 15 months between his move to Hong Kong and the murders, Rurik Jutting would spend around £1 million on prostitutes, alcohol and drugs, specifically cocaine, with him later reporting that he was snorting between 10 and 20 grams a day, quantities that would likely kill a normal person. In order to help him sleep, Jutting was using alcohol to knock himself out, drinking a bottle of vodka a day. His cocaine use apparently fueled his insatiable sexual appetite. Jutting would often be seen, and sometimes photographed, surrounded by sex workers. He would often engage in 6-day-long drug and sex-fueled binges, with a revolving door of sex workers that he would abuse. He later admitted that he raped 2 women he paid for sex. With one, he gave her extra money to stop her reporting him. With the other, it's unclear, but he likely threatened her. Again, given how sadistic this man is, I think the idea that he only raped 2 out of the likely hundreds of sex workers he used is laughable. He would also frequently travel to the red light district of Angeles City, north of Manila, where he would be seen flashing the cash and paying multiple women for sexual services. Jutting also had sex with quote-unquote ladyboys, and also went on to Grindr to look for sexual encounters with men. On top of all of this, he was scouring the internet looking for the most extreme pornography he could find, depicting the rape, torture and mutilation of women. Later, he would tell a psychiatrist, quote, "I was trying to do everything I could to get new experiences, but always ended up disappointed." And this is key to understanding Rurik Jutting. He was continuously searching for a greater high, pushing boundaries, trying to achieve the greatest amount of pleasure, the most intense orgasm, but nothing worked. Simply raping sex workers was not enough. He wanted more. When he decided he wanted to escalate to torturing or murdering women is unclear, but this was likely something he'd been fantasizing about for years. As we'll get to, Jutting was also having fantasies akin to killers like Leonard Lake and Charles Ng and Gary Heidnik of kidnapping women and keeping them as sex slaves, but in his case, he wanted a stock of teenage girls to use and abuse. Jutting's hedonistic lifestyle soon began to impact his work. He was being watched closely because of his demeanour and increasingly erratic behaviour. On one occasion in 2014, he flew back to London for a work meeting, but was unable to attend because he was high on cocaine, having just come down off a multi-day drug and sex binge. He lied to his employers and said that he had HIV and then flew back to Hong Kong. Whilst earning vast sums of money, it seems that Rurik Jutting was, according to one of his ex-girlfriends, in serious financial trouble, and the stress of work was making him physically and mentally ill, more so than he already was. Then, in October 2014, just a few days before the first murder, Jutting quit his job at Merrill Lynch. The circumstances around this are unclear, but the fact that his securities trading license was subsequently suspended suggests to me that he left before he was pushed out. This appeared to trigger something in Jutting. Any paper-thin barriers in his mind, stopping him from acting on his most depraved and sadistic sexual fantasies, fell away, and he would soon murder 2 women, torturing one for almost 72 hours whilst filming her suffering, all to get his sick sexual kicks. Much of what we know about the murders committed by Rurik Jutting comes from evidence he provided, including statements he made to the police and psychiatrists, but also comments he made in videos he recorded during his crimes. As a result, I'll use his words extensively, but point out obvious minimisation and lies. There were 2 victims in this case, and I'll tell you what I've been able to find out about them through my research. It annoys me that in many articles they're simply described as sex workers, with no consideration that these were 2 women, 2 human beings with families, and in one case a son, who were devastated by their deaths. 25-year-old Sumati Ningsi was born in a region near Java in Indonesia. She first arrived in Hong Kong in 2011 to be a domestic helper, but like thousands of other Indonesian women, she was paid a pittance, and this was not enough to support her family and a 5-year-old son back home. And so, through necessity, she resorted to sex work, advertising her services on Craigslist. Back home, she would have earned around £70 a month rice farming, but she was able to send back 4 or 5 times this amount by working hard, but also putting herself in danger and potentially being raped or even murdered by predatory men. Unfortunately, Sumati would suffer this horrifying fate, and unknown to her, the end of her life began on Saturday the 25th of October 2014, when she received a message from Rurik Jutting requesting a meeting at his apartment. Sumati was reluctant. The two had met several months before at a hotel near his apartment, and as Jutting later told the police, during this encounter, he'd held her down and begun to violate her with sex toys. Sumati said that she was uncomfortable and asked to leave, even giving back half the money she'd been paid. She asked if she could bring a friend, but Jutting refused. He then offered her the equivalent of £1,200 to spend the night with him at his apartment, and Sumati agreed. She was seen walking into the J residence apartment building with Rurik Jutting at 3:38 a.m. on Saturday the 25th of October 2014, and she would never be seen alive again. According to Jutting, when the pair got into his apartment, they took cocaine together and they attempted to have sex, but he couldn't get an erection. He later said, quote, "We played a bit. I got rough with her in the course of that. It went from consensual to non-consensual." Then, using a purple rope, he tied Sumati up and took a photo of her, sending this to his cocaine dealer. Now this is the first bullshit alert. Jutting appeared to try and imply that things had just happened. This was meant to be a normal sexual encounter, but something went wrong. An important detail is that it appears that Rurik Jutting would rent places, whether this be hotel rooms, etc., to live out his deviant fantasies, but in order to murder someone, he would have to do this in a place where he was in complete control, his apartment. So I've no doubt that Sumati Ningsi was lured there to be raped, tortured and murdered. Also, it's quite clear that he had the tools he was going to use to live out his ultimate fantasy all laid out ready. This man is a sexual sadist. Imagine what really happened is that Sumati walked in, the door was closed behind her, and she saw the area laid out where she was going to spend the rest of her life in agony. Her fear would have excited Jutting, and he would have savoured every moment. Sumati was raped and tortured for the next 3 days, with police later recovering 4 hours of footage of the horror she went through, filmed on Jutting's phone, along with 2,000 photographs he'd taken. The jury had to view all of this, and whilst the footage itself has not, for obvious reasons, ever been released, descriptions of what is shown have been published. In part of the video, the muted screams and cries of Sumati could be heard while she's brutalised and tormented. She was asked, quote, "Do you want me to hit you? If you say yes, I'll hit you once. If you say no, I'll hit you twice. If you scream, I will punish you. Understand?" At other times, Jutting demanded that Sumati tell him that she loved him, and he would call her a good girl when she complied. However, if she didn't do it fast enough, or to his satisfaction, she would be beaten. The post-mortem showed that Sumati was tortured with pliers and whipped repeatedly with a belt. She also had horrific injuries to her genitals. This was due to being repeatedly raped, but also Jutting forcing his fist inside of her. Other degrading acts were described by Jutting on video, with him gleefully telling the camera, quote, "She voluntarily ate feces out of the toilet and then just smiled at me afterwards. I urinated into her mouth. She threw up, and I made her eat her own vomit. I made her take drugs. She was my property, and there to please me." Eventually, Rurik Jutting tired of his toy and decided to dispose of it. During the night of Monday the 27th of October 2014, after almost 72 hours of torture and rape, 25-year-old Sumati Ningsi was forced to lick the seat of the toilet, and while she was doing this, Jutting slit her throat, with the wound going down to her spine. almost decapitating her. Over the next 3 days, Jutting, high on cocaine, recorded a series of videos reveling in what he'd done. In the first one, he said, quote, "My name is Rurik Jutting. About 5 minutes ago, I just murdered this woman here. To be precise, I cut her throat while she was bending over, licking a dirty toilet bowl. I treated her as a non-person, a sex object, and that turned me on. It's Monday night. I've held her captive since early Saturday. I've raped her repeatedly. I tortured her badly. My hand is still shaking, and I feel sick. I don't feel guilty, but clearly I feel something. I can't describe what it means. I don't try to push myself to continue to be bad. I wanted to live a fantasy." Some people may see this as the narcissistic ramblings of a murderer, which is true. I still don't feel guilty. I feel sickness. If this ever comes to light, my career will be over. I will probably be justly in prison for life. The narcissistic ramblings of Rurik Jutting, Rurik George Caton Jutting, former Vice President of Structured Equity, Finance and Trading at Merrill Lynch, newly unemployed and part-time rapist murderer. Obviously, I'm clearly loopy. During the video, Sumati's broken and brutalised body was filmed lying almost decapitated in the shower. In other videos, the unhinged and disturbed mind of Jutting was fully on display. At one point, he moved the camera to show his large belly and lowered it to glimpse his genitals and said, quote, "Killing her may have been kindness. Living with that would have haunted her." He also spoke about his plans for the future, and his deranged, drug-addled brain fluctuated wildly about what he was going to do next. Jutting would say that he felt ashamed and he should jump from his balcony, but then spoke about his fancy about going to the UK and kidnapping 3 teenage girls from Wycombe Abbey, a girls' boarding school in High Wycombe, northwest of London, with him saying, quote, "They would be, say, 15 years old, and I would basically turn these 3 girls into my sex slaves. It would be good to psychologically play them off against each other. My destiny is to push the boundaries to complete, utter inhumanity." Eventually, Rurik Jutting wrapped Sumati's body in plastic sheets, placed it in a suitcase, and wheeled this onto his balcony. Around this same time, Jutting changed his out-of-office message to the following, quote, "I am out of the office indefinitely. For urgent inquiries, or indeed any inquiries, please contact someone who is not an insane psychopath. For escalation, please contact God. Those suspect the devil will have custody." Last line only really worked if I had followed through. By Friday the 31st of October 2014, Jutting's elation from his first kill was beginning to fade. He needed another victim. At 12:51 PM, he was seen leaving the apartment complex and returning back 75 minutes later, carrying 2 heavy bags. Inside were tools for the next round of torture, including sex toys, sandpaper, zip ties, a hammer, nails, pliers, and a blowtorch. Later that night, Jutting filmed himself proudly holding up the contents of the bag to the camera, saying, quote, "The question is, what am I going to do with this bag of DIY supplies? The most inhumane torture possible." Moments after recording this, Rurik Jutting left his property and went to the new Makati bar close to where he lived. Working there was Seneng Mujasi, a woman from southwestern Indonesia. Her age varies across reports, but it seems she was likely 30 years old. Seneng worked in the bar and other odd jobs to make ends meet. I haven't found much information about her, but the bar manager described her as a, quote, "beautiful, happy, good-looking woman. She was trying to make a better life for later. The money she made here, she didn't throw away on all kinds of things." Instead, he said that she was saving to buy a house in Indonesia where she could live out the rest of her life in peace, comfort. Another friend described Seneng as, quote, "a strong, nice, gentle and friendly woman. She was really alive. but that is all gone now. Senning occasionally worked as a prostitute and was approached by Jutting. For several hours, he'd moved around the club, propositioning women like a predator, until he found someone who would take him up on his offer. Between 1:35 a.m. and 2:15 a.m. on Saturday the 1st November 2014, he found his next victim. During his police interview, Jutting would later state, quote, "I don't know why I chose her. She was, at that point, simply prey." He said that he would pay Senning around £2,500 to stay at his apartment for the weekend. The prospect of money towards building her dream home was too much to pass up, and Senning and Jutting went back to his apartment. It appears that she knew something was wrong, as at 3:25 a.m, Senning sent a message to a friend, which read, quote, "Something smells really bad. I want to get out of here." The smell was something that had been complained about by other residents. It was the smell of decomposition from the body of Sumati Ningsi, who Jutting had tortured and eventually murdered 4 days before, with her remains being hidden in a suitcase on the balcony. Senning was now locked in an apartment with the man responsible, who had hidden a torture kit nearby, ready to do the same thing to her. What happened next, we can only take Rurik Jutting's word for. According to him, Senning spotted a makeshift gag that was under one of the pillows. She leapt up and started shouting at the top of her lungs. Jutting had to silence her, and so he took a knife, which had been hidden under one of the other pillows, and began slashing at her neck. Senning fell to the floor, and Jutting believed she was dead. So in his mind, Rurik Jutting had killed twice, and he clearly had no intention of stopping. He could, realistically, have simply packed his bags and left. The body of Sumati was clearly too decomposed for him to move the suitcase through the lobby to dispose of it. It would have to be left, and inevitably, at some point, the smell would become so bad that someone would break down the door to investigate. They would then find both bodies, but this would take time, likely days. By that point, with his resources, Jutting could have been thousands of miles away in hiding. Potentially, he would have time to return to the UK and enact his plan to kidnap schoolgirls and turn them into sex slaves. However, bizarrely, instead of doing this, between 3:42 a.m. and 3:55 a.m, so around 20 minutes after he attacked Senning, he called the police 3 times and calmly told them that he'd killed 2 people. I think there are 2 primary reasons why Jutting made this call, with both being rooted in his need for control. We'll circle back to one of these possibilities later, but the other seems to have been due to his mental state at the time. Rurik Jutting later stated that in the half an hour before he made the calls to the police, he'd taken 2 or 3 days worth of cocaine and was extremely paranoid. He convinced himself that Senning's screams had been heard. From his balcony, he saw a police car in the distance, apparently coming for him. He also saw people walking the corridor and believed they were police officers or soldiers. He thought he was surrounded. He would go out on his own terms. He would take back control in this situation. He would control the narrative, and so he called the police on himself and confessed. I would love to have seen his face when he was told that until he called, the authorities had no idea what he'd done. In his final moments of freedom, Jutting again went back to filming himself on his phone, stating, quote, "My name is Rurik Jutting. I'm sitting in my flat in Wan Chai. I'm trying to surrender myself to the multiple, I don't know if they're police or army or special forces around me, and I don't really know what they want me to do. I've killed 2. The first one I tortured. There will be no redemption for me." The police quickly arrived, and they stepped into a scene of slaughter. Senning was found lying on the floor, a 12-inch knife, cocaine, and sex toys next to her. She was still barely alive, but within minutes of the police arriving, she passed away. In amongst all of this was Rurik Jutting, who was spouting, quote, "delirious nonsense." He was arrested at the scene on suspicion of murder. It took a further 8 hours for the body of Sumati Ningsi to be discovered in the suitcase on the balcony. Her remains had decomposed significantly in the 5 days since her murder. The news cameras quickly descended and captured the moments when both women's bodies were removed from the building, as well as forensic technicians trying to piece together the horror that had occurred in apartment 3109. Once Jutting had sobered up, he was interviewed by the police, and he calmly and methodically talked them through his crimes. He was shown photographs he'd taken of Sumati during the 3 days of torture, and when shown one of these and asked to explain what was in it, Jutting said, quote, "She's currently tied up by me. She's being restrained here against her will. She absolutely did not consent." He added, "This photo was taken during around 3 days that she was captive against her will in my flat." He then described himself as being in a state of extreme sexual aggression during this time. On Sunday the 2nd of November 2014, the day after his arrest, Rurik Jutting was charged with the murders of Sumati Ningsi and Selim Mujasi. The next day, he appeared at Hong Kong's Eastern Magistrates Court, where he was remanded to prison to await his fate. In October 2016, 2 years after his arrest, at Hong Kong's Court of First Instance, Rurik Jutting pleaded not guilty to the murders of Sumati Ningsi and Selim Mujasi on the grounds of diminished responsibility. He offered pleas of manslaughter, but these were rejected. In the time since his arrest, Jutting had been subjected to a barrage of tests by 4 psychiatrists, who all reached the same conclusion, including the fact that he had chronic issues with drugs and alcohol, but most importantly, that he suffered from narcissistic personality disorder and sexual sadism disorder. The trial then began, and the defence's strategy was bizarre, but not unexpected. They played on people's lack of understanding of personality disorders and the impact of drugs and alcohol on someone's behaviour. Essentially, they tried to portray Rurik Jutting as this high-flying banker, a man with the world at his feet, who because of his underlying personality disorders, in combination with drugs, had completely lost control. He was not responsible for his actions. Essentially again, this is the "why did he do it?" mental health defence, using this term so broadly as to be utterly ridiculous. The prosecution countered. They portrayed Jutting for who he is, an extremely sick and evil man. Yes, he had these underlying personality disorders, but he chose to indulge his disgusting fantasies. He chose to take drugs knowing full well they made him worse, made him more likely to act. In fact, it seemed that he took drugs to heighten the experience. They pointed out that during the videos of the torture, Jutting was completely in control, living out fantasies that he'd likely developed since he was a child. Due to the extreme nature of the evidence, the jury were forced to watch the videos that Rurik Jutting had filmed and the photographs he'd taken in a closed room. However, audio from the videos was played in open court. The shocked faces of everyone in the courtroom were contrasted by Jutting's demeanour. He was cool, calm and collected, only occasionally sitting back and closing his eyes when the most disgusting elements of his behaviour were described. On Tuesday the 8th of November 2016, Rurik Jutting was found guilty of 2 counts of murder. When the verdicts were passed, he showed no emotion. He was back in court later that same day before Deputy High Court Judge Michael Stuart Moore. Before the sentence was passed, Jutting's defence read out a letter written by their client, apparently expressing his remorse. With regards to the women he murdered, it said, quote, "My actions preceding their deaths were horrific, even by the standard of homicide trials." It went on, "I accept this as a just and appropriate punishment. The evil I've inflicted can never be remedied by me in words or actions. Nevertheless, for whatever it may be worth, I am sorry. I am sorry beyond words." He said that he was haunted by his behaviour and was aware of the acute pain I've caused to their loved ones. Judge Stuart Moore utterly rejected this false apology, stating, quote, "The defendant has shown not a shred of remorse for what he has done. The closest he came was when he told the police he felt sorry for the victims' families." He also described Jutting as the archetypal sexual predator. When he is affected by cocaine and alcohol, as he was on in both these murders, he represents an extreme danger to women, particularly in the sex trade. He then sentenced him. for the murders of 25-year-old Sumati Ningsi and 30-year-old Seneng Majasi, 31-year-old Rurik Jutting was given a life sentence. This, in Hong Kong, translates to imprisonment for the rest of his natural life, so Jutting will likely never be released. Despite claiming that he was sorry and he would accept his punishment, Jutting appealed his conviction in 2018 and asked for a new trial, citing procedural errors. This was denied by 3 judges of the Court of Final Appeal, who said that his points had no merit. 2 years before this, Rurik Jutting was apparently trying to get himself transferred to the UK to serve his sentence, inevitably trying to do his time in more comfortable conditions. This, it appears, was also refused. The story ends there. There are no recent reports about Jutting. It can be assumed he is rotting in a prison somewhere in China. I imagine this drives him mad, the fact that the narcissist is now just another criminal, forgotten by the world. I knew a little bit about this case before I began researching it, but I had no idea about how evil and dangerous Rurik Jutting actually was. I mean, what the fuck is wrong with people, seriously? Each case I cover seems to throw up some new level of horror that one person would inflict on another. I'm always happy when there's a psychiatric assessment in court, as it does much of the heavy lifting for me. And so, with this case, the headline is that Jutting is a narcissistic, sexual sadist, someone whose whole life was dominated by the pursuit of sexual gratification through the pain of others. His case is interesting because I think it dispels so many perceptions that people may have about offenders. So, for example, some people think that sex offenders are dirty old men and they can be spotted a mile away. And while some do fit that profile, if you work in the criminal justice system, you quickly figure out that 95% of the time, these people look perfectly normal, and that's what makes them so dangerous, because they blend in. These people are able to get close to victims because of just how banal they are. Individuals who commit serious sexual crimes cross all social and economic boundaries, and in fact, people like Rurik Jutting are worse because they have the resources to indulge their sickest desires. Unfortunately, the world is a place where with enough money, you can pretty much do anything, no matter how depraved and inhuman. And Jutting believed that he was entitled to do this because since day one, he was told that he was special, better than everyone else. I don't imagine he was ever told no. His every whim was catered for. He was the eldest child, some sort of prodigy. I find it difficult to believe that a man this dangerous did not start showing deviant, violent, or sexual behaviour from a young age, but this was potentially covered up. From when he was a teenager, he was obsessed with violent pornography. He was fixated on dominating his sexual partners, having complete control over them, getting off on the fear in their eyes. Given how early he formed these views, I believe that by the time of the murders, and likely for years before, Rurik Jutting could not get aroused or climax without violence being part of the sexual act. This brings me to what I said in the video about Jutting being a serial rapist. I stand by that. I think he was very selective in who he targeted. He chose prostitutes because they would be less likely to report him to the police, more likely to go along with his sick fantasies. And I think he was right, and as each attack went unreported, Jutting felt more and more confident that he could get away with anything, and this fed into his narcissism. As I stated earlier, these women, I believe, were the first victims of torture, with Jutting honing his skills. His job in banking gave him almost unlimited resources to indulge any vice he wanted, whether this was sex, drugs or booze, but this was never enough for Rurik Jutting. Things that we would consider wild, such as 6-day-long drug and sex benders, were mild to him, completely normal. He slept with men and women, all in pursuit of his desire to experience the ultimate high, the ultimate rush, the ultimate sexual experience. But nothing ever met his expectations. He always felt disappointed, because this is not what he truly desired. He wanted to rape, mutilate, and ultimately butcher women, and he had inevitably been fantasizing about this for years. But one thing stopped him. I think this was his job. This gave him a sense of power, importance and money, all of the things that are integral to him. And then he quit his job, although, as I've already outlined, I think this was a case of leaving before he was fired. I think this blew a circuit in Jutting's mind. He was likely furious. He'd suffered a narcissistic injury. This was likely the first time he'd had to deal with any sort of real adversity. He was not used to it. Failure was something for regular people, not him. I think what he did next was not only him living out his darkest fancies, but him using the victims' bodies to take out his anger, to reinforce his perception that he was a god, the most important person in existence. As to why Jutting called the police, it's clear this was, in part, due to his paranoia. He thought the authorities were onto him, so he took back control and gave himself up. However, I think another part of this was attention. There was no point in doing these things if no one knew, if they didn't know he'd done them, how powerful he was. Credibility to this being part of his thinking comes from what he said to a psychiatrist after his arrest, where he equated his life to the Truman Show and believed that millions of people were fixated with his court case like it was the trial of the century. Jutting was photographed smirking repeatedly on his way to court. This is a man who was enjoying the attention, having his crimes described in detail, seeing the disgust and discomfort in the face of others. I think that Jutting thought he could have his cake and eat it. He could get the sexual thrill from reliving his crimes and then manipulate everyone into believing his bullshit defense that he was not in control. But thankfully, this didn't work, and Rurik Jutting will rot in prison half a world away. I have no doubt, had he not been caught, the level of degradation and torture he would have put countless women through would have been unimaginable. He was a fledgling serial killer. Now he's banged up, irrelevant, alone, and I imagine this grates on him every waking moment. The narcissist, who went from having the world at his feet, earning hundreds of thousands of pounds a year, living in a luxury apartment, reduced to a squalid prison cell, and being told what to do every minute of every day. Hopefully, he has decades of misery left ahead of him. So what are your thoughts on this case? If you like the content, then consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, and you can also send a one-off donation to support the channel via the thanks button. Please like, share and subscribe. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.